President Donald Trump says it's an honor to be meeting with Kim Jong-un, whom he expects to have a terrific relationship with now that they've been personally introduced. "I feel really great. I feel really great," Trump told reporters as he sat down for a meeting with Kim devoid of policy officials and only their translators. "We are going to have a great discussion, and I think a tremendous success. It's gonna be tremendously successful, and it's an honor, and we will have a terrific relationship, I have no doubt." Kim told the U.S. president, "It was not easy to get here. Old prejudices and practices worked as obstacles on our way forward, but we overcame all of them." "I think that's true," Trump replied, shaking his counterpart's hand, and making what appeared to be a joke that was audible to only the two men and their translators as reporters were led out. Trump had taunted his critics earlier on Tuesday in the hours before his history-making meeting with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. "The fact that I am having a meeting is a major loss for the U.S., say the haters and losers. We have our hostages. Testing, research and all missile launches have stopped, and these pundits, who have called me wrong from the beginning, have nothing else they can say. We will be fine," he tweeted. Trump began shaping news coverage of his summit with Kim, taking place at 9 a.m. local time and 9 p.m. in Washington, bright and early at 5:30 a.m. He said in tweets before the sun rose over Singapore that meetings between staffs and representatives are going well and quickly, echoing a statement from his White House the evening before the talks were progressing so fast Trump would leave Singapore early. "But in the end, that doesn't matter," he acknowledged on Twitter. "We will all know soon whether or not a real deal, unlike those of the past, can happen." Trump's motorcades was the first to pull into the Capella Resort in Singapore, which has been closed to outsiders for days out of extreme precaution, on Tuesday morning. Kim was not far behind, after making the under 15-minute drive from his hotel to Sentosa Island along a route filled with gawkers. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo shared a photo of himself marching through a hallway with a determined look on his face as his opening salvo in a tweet that declared, "We are ready for today." Kim, meanwhile, spent the hours leading up to talks attempting to soften his image. The vicious ruler who has directed the murder of his own family members in a quest to consolidate his already absolute power posed for photos on Monday night as he went on a sightseeing tour with Singapore's Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan. His tour included a stop at the Marina Bay Sands Hotel and Casino, where he was welcomed by a cheering crowd of tourists and local residents who had flocked to the location to take in the spectacle. As his trip around the city was taking place, the White House pulled the curtain back on the schedule for today's talks. A White House statement said the summit would consist of an introductory meeting, group discussion with the two nations' senior officials, working lunch and press avail before Trump departs for Washington. The discussions between the United States and North Korea are ongoing and have moved more quickly than expected, the statement said in an explanation of Trump's newly announced Tuesday evening departure. The White House said that Trump and Kim will speak with only translators present before a joint meeting with their delegations, as is consistent with the way that conversations with foreign leaders are typically handled. The president usually spends several minutes alone with his counterparts before moving into expanded bilaterals. Pompeo told journalists during a briefing several hours earlier that Trump is going into this meeting with confidence, a positive attitude and an eagerness for real progress toward North Korean disarmament. He also said that America is prepared to offer Kim unique security guarantees if the country is willing to give up its nuclear weapons. Trump and Kim arrived within hours of each other in Singapore on Sunday. The U.S. president, who almost never dines outside the White House and does not partake in alcohol, hunkered down for most of Monday. His only trip outside the posh hotel he's residing at was to the presidential palace for a meeting and luncheon with Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. The summit's host nation presented him with a cake to celebrate his Thursday birthday. Trump turned 72 on June 14. During the rare trip out of his hermetic nation, the 33-year-old Kim also hobnobbed with Singaporean officials. The dictator sat with Loong for formal talks on Sunday and went out on the town with the Prime Minister's education and finance ministers the following evening. Trump said Monday that he is preparing for a very interesting meeting tomorrow with Kim in the only remarks he has made to camera since arriving in Singapore on Sunday. "We've got very interesting meeting in particular tomorrow," he said, And I just think it's going to work out very nicely. The visit to see Lee was the only outward-facing item on Trump's agenda on the eve of his high-stakes negotiations with Kim. A meet-and-greet at Trump's hotel with embassy staff was held behind closed doors, and after lunch the White House said there would be no more appearances on Monday in public for the U.S. President. Deputy White House Press Secretary Raj Shah told Daily Mail.com that Trump, who was not accompanied abroad by the First Lady, would spend his evening in briefings with senior staff preparing for the summit with Kim that was due to kick off first thing on Tuesday. An initial meeting was to take place at 9 a.m. local time with the potential for others to follow, Pompeo told reporters on Monday evening in remarks underscoring a Saturday declaration by the president that this is truly a mission of peace, and said he is hopeful that the summit will set the conditions for future productive talks. He also swatted down a New York Times report that claimed the U.S. lacked the technical expertise to have a conversation about the dismantling of North Korea's nuclear weapons program in real time. Pompeo said that the president's senior-most expert in weapons of mass destruction is on the ground in Singapore, and that officials with PhDs in every relevant area are waiting on standby in Washington. The ultimate objective we seek from the diplomacy with North Korea has not changed. The complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean peninsula is the only outcome that the United States will accept, he asserted at a televised briefing. Until that time, he said, sanctions will remain in place and those measures will increase if talks with North Korea stall. If Kim plays ball, Pompeo said, Trump is prepared to ensure that a WMD-less North Korea is secure. We're prepared to take security assurances that are different, unique, than have been provided, that America's been willing to provide previously. We think this is both necessary and appropriate, he asserted. Pompeo refused to say what those security assurances were. There's gonna be a lot of work left to do. There's a lot of detail that's gotta be provided. We are not going to conduct these negotiations in the open with media, he stated. We're gonna conduct them between the two parties so that we have an opportunity to have a real success here. Trump's wide-open schedule in Singapore left the U.S. president with plenty of time to tweet, even as he was supposed to be turning his attention to the Kim summit. He sent several messages playing up the U.S. trade deficit with Canada and the European Union on Monday and tweeted on Tuesday as he was en route to Capella. Great to be in Singapore, excitement in the air, he stated. Trump did not take questions about the status of the summit from press as he met with Lee at the presidential palace. The two leaders shared a quick handshake and then walked into their working lunch behind aides staffing them during the 2-hour visit. Trump told his host, "We do appreciate your hospitality, your professionalism, and your friendship." Lee said to him at the luncheon table, "Thank you," in the only remarks that were captured by journalists. A tweet from Singapore's foreign minister later showed President Trump being presented with a birthday cake while Pompeo and White House Chief of Staff John Kelly clapped. "Celebrating birthday, a bit early," the caption said. Earlier in the day, North Korean Vice Foreign Minister Cho Sun-hui and a delegation of North Korean officials met with U.S. officials, including United States Ambassador to the Philippines Sung Kim, at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Singapore to negotiate the final details of tomorrow's summit. As the lunch was concluding, Pompeo said in an update, "The president and the entire U.S. team are looking forward to tomorrow's summit. We have had substantive and detailed meetings to date, including this morning with the North Koreans. I would like to thank our Singaporean hosts for their gracious hospitality in helping to organize the summit," he said. The president is well prepared for tomorrow's engagement with Chairman Kim. The U.S. position remains clear and unchanged. The U.S. president arrived in Singapore on Sunday evening local time for talks could change the course of history and earn him the Nobel Peace Prize, if successful in convincing the world's most isolated nation to end its pursuit of mankind's most deadly weapons. After a grueling 21 hours of travel that included a refueling stop on a Greek island, Trump touched down at Pulabar Air Base in Singapore. He told journalists nearby he was feeling very good about his meeting on Tuesday with Kim and then sped off in his motorcade to conclude his first evening in the country in privacy of his room at the Shangri-La, the luxury hotel housing the U.S. delegation. He followed in the footsteps of Kim today by meeting with Lee after the North Korean leader yesterday met with the head of the summit's host nation after his own arrival on Sunday afternoon via an Air China flight. Kim is staying at the St. Regis Hotel, near Trump. The foreign leaders will hold their summit at a third location, the Capella Resort, ensconced on 30 acres of land south of the city on Sentosa Island. Their face-to-face discussion tomorrow will be a first between a U.S. president and North Korean autocrat since Kim's grandfather, Kim Il-sung, assumed power in 1948. President Trump has boldly predicted that the summit with Kim Jong-un will be a great success and have a positive outcome not just for the two parties but for the world at large. And if the summit doesn't go as planned, the Trump administration said Sunday it would be Canada's fault for trying to exploit its relationship with the U.S. Sorry, we cannot let our friends, or enemies, take advantage of us on trade anymore, Trump tweeted. We must put the American worker first. Trump signaled Monday in his first tweets from Singapore exactly where his focus was heading into a nuclear summit with Kim Jong-un, and it wasn't on the decades-old dispute with North Korea over its threatening behavior. Trump instead took aim at Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who he's been sparring with from across the international date line over steel and aluminum tariffs the U.S. imposed on its allies in the name of national security. Fair trade is now to be called full trade if it is not reciprocal, Trump on Monday morning harumphed. According to a Canada release, they make almost $100 billion in trade with U.S. Guess they were bragging and got caught. Minimum 17B tax dairy from us at 270%. Then Justin Axe heard when called out. The European Union was next on Trump's list, with the president complaining in follow-up tweets that the U.S. foots the bill for the bulk of the West's shared security through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization only to get ripped off by the very same countries in the trade arena. Only after the rant did Trump mention the excitement in the air in Singapore, the high-class city that doubles as a nation and is generously footing bill for his $20 million Kim summit. A first-term president with no prior political experience who has a flair for the dramatics, Trump's skeptics say this week's summit with Kim will serve as little more than a misguided photo op. His admission in the lead-up to the trip that he'd done little to get ready for the face-to-face with the 33-year-old dictator and was relying on his attitude and willingness to strike an accord did little to lessen anxiety at home that Trump would make a catastrophic mistake. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer on Thursday chided that the situation is far too dangerous for seat-of-the-pants negotiating after warning Trump earlier in the week against entering an agreement with Kim just for the sake of reaching a deal. The sniping from the sidelines prompted Trump to charge that Schumer and his party did nothing about North Korea and is now telling me what to do at the summit the Dems could never set up. Schumer failed with North Korea and Iran, he tweeted. We don't need his advice. The 71-year-old billionaire whose birthday is Thursday reassured naysayers Friday that he has been preparing all my life for the showdown with Kim and said Saturday at a media availability that within the first minute he expects to know if his negotiation partner is serious about denuclearization. I think I'll know pretty quickly whether or not, in my opinion, something positive will happen, Trump said at an impromptu news conference after the G7 summit. And if I think it won't happen, I'm not going to waste my time. I don't want to waste his time. Trump has repeatedly said he will get up and leave the meeting that he now claims will be only a first step in the direction of North Korean denuclearization if talks are not productive. I think it's a getting to know you meeting. Plus, he said last week, setting expectations, after a visit from Kim's lead negotiator. And that can be a very positive thing, he added. Trump's determination that he would not be able to persuade Kim in one sitting to drop his country's decades-old pursuit of a nuclear warhead with the power to destroy cities inside the United States provided for an easy-to-meet goal for his administration, just showing up to the meeting he called off once already. I did it once before, he pointed out Friday at a Rose Garden news conference. You have to be able to walk away. For Kim to get a sustained audience with the president or a visit later in the negotiations to the White House, the Trump administration says North Korea will have to do more than exchange niceties. A detailed task list and timetable for disarmament, however, has not been communicated by the U.S. government. I think it's a process. I've told you that many times before. I think it's not a one-meeting deal, Trump told reporters Thursday. It will be wonderful if it were. The U.S. president and former reality TV star insisted that the meeting will be at a minimum the beginning of a good relationship between himself and Kim. And that's something that's very important toward the ultimate making of a deal. I'd love to say it could happen in one deal, and maybe it can, he said. They have to denuke. If they don't denuclearize, that will not be acceptable. We cannot take sanctions off. The sanctions are extraordinarily powerful. Trump's administration has been unwavering in its demand that North Korea must completely and verifiably end its nuclear weapons program to earn sanctions relief. The Trump administration and North Korea have wildly different interpretations, though, of what it means to denuclearize the Korean peninsula. For North Korea, the Heritage Foundation's Bruce Klingner explains, denuclearization includes anything that impacts or influences the landmass, including nuclear-capable submarines and aircraft in Guam. So if the president is going in and not realizing how North Korea defines things, and that if you don't have clearly delineated text, he said, then you might agree to something verbally or on paper, where North Korea has a far different interpretation of it than the U.S. has. Pompeo has twice met with Kim since early April to lay the groundwork for this week's talks. He said Thursday that the U.S. had narrowed the gap between its vision of denuclearization and the one that's being used by North Korea during recent sessions, yet declined to say exactly where that leaves the two parties. What I have said publicly is he has indicated to me, personally, that he is prepared to denuclearize, that he understands that the current model doesn't work, that he's prepared to denuclearize, Pompeo told journalists from the White House's podium, alluding to a failed deal with North Korea that former President Bill Clinton's administration brokered and won with Iran that Barack Obama's government signed and Trump last month withdrew from. Pompeo said Kim understands that we can't do it the way we've done it before and that denuclearization cannot be a years-long process. He allowed that this doesn't happen instantaneously and will take time, but that the model for succeeding, security assurance, and political normalization, and denuclearization completely, verifiably, and irreversibly, for that to take place, we've got to make bold decisions, he stated. Trump has targeted North Korea with what his administration calls a maximum pressure campaign meant to starve Kim of the resources and funding he needs to fully realize his country's long-held nuclear ambitions that he has pledged to keep in place into the brutal leader who ascended the throne in 2011 breaks. The international sanctions levied by the United Nations, and layered on by the U.S., have mostly cut North Korea off from crude oil and outside transactions of any type. I could add a lot more, but I don't. I've chosen not to do that at this time, Trump said Thursday in an admission that the U.S. is not using maximum pressure to break North Korea. But that may happen, he said during remarks in the Oval Office with visiting leader Shinzo Abe. He said later, at a joint news conference with the Japanese Prime Minister, that use of the term maximum pressure at all following his conversation with Kim should serve as a red flag to those reading the tea leaves about the outcome of the tete-a-tete. We don't use the term anymore because we're going into a friendly negotiation. Perhaps after that negotiation I will be using it again, he stated. You'll know how well we do in the negotiation. If you hear me saying we're going to use maximum pressure, you'll know the negotiation did not do well. Frankly, there's no reason to say it. North Korea, for its part, was listening out for another term in the United States rhetoric that it deemed too aggressive, the Libya model for denuclearization. Kim's regime beat up both the president's national security advisor, John Bolton, and his vice president, Mike Pence, for using phrase that has historically negative connotations. Libya's Muammar Gaddafi was ousted and executed following a voluntary abandonment of nuclear weapons that he thought would be accompanied by assistance and protection from the United States. Gaddafi did not have a formal agreement with the U.S., like the one that Trump is pledging to strike with North Korea. Nor did he receive the type of assurances that he'd be propped up as Trump has done for Kim. Trump says the U.S. will make sure that Kim remains in power if he denuclearizes. He has also floated economic prosperity, in the form of new investment from American companies, as a motivator for Kim to decide he's worthy of doing business with. For Kim to take the enormous risk of ending the nuclear weapons program that made him a household name around the world to begin with, North Korea has said it will need hefty security assurances that it has not entirely outlined publicly. Former CIA Director James Clapper says Trump should agree to a diplomatic presence in Pyongyang. The ex-spy chief says that Trump should recognize that Kim's regime is likely to ask for a commitment from the United States to pull back on its military presence on the peninsula. We should be mindful that that could easily be a two-way street and that the North Koreans could easily demand that we denuclearize, meaning no more B-1S, B-2S or B-52s on the peninsula, or within operational proximity of the peninsula, Clapper said last week in an interview with radio host Hugh Hewitt. And I hope we're ready to deal with that. They are paranoid about our bombers, Trump said Thursday. When it's all said and done, he expects the normalization of relations between the U.S. and North Korea. He floated a peace agreement as a potential show of good faith. We're looking at it. We're talking about it with them. We're talking about it with a lot of other people. But that could happen, he said at his news conference on Thursday. Sounds a little bit strange, but that's probably the easy part. The hard part remains after that. Kling Nor, an ex-CIA operative who is now a senior fellow at the Conservative Heritage Foundation, cautioned Trump against being too ready to sign an agreement, even one as benign on the surface as declaring peace. However, even if just a political declaration is made, that could have an impact on alliance deterrence capabilities, which would be dangerous if we don't first address the North Korean threat, he told Daily Mail. He said any deal that Trump signs must include a clear commitment to denuclearization based on the United Nations standards, not North Korea's, and it must include sufficient verification that Kim has given up all of his nuclear weapons and production facilities. Beatrice Fine, the executive director of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, similarly said that a deal must include a timeline for disarmament and a requirement that competent international authorities carry out routine compliance checks. Fine said mandatory adoption of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty by both North Korea and the United States, which is a signatory to the UN treaty but hasn't ratified it, should also be part of any accord that comes about. We need to see the international legal framework involved in this deal, not just whatever these two men like that come up with, she stressed. In 2017, Fine accepted a Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of ICAN for the organization's work to implement the Test Ban Treaty. She assessed ahead of Trump's meeting with Kim, "There are no quick fixes to this. This is going to be a long process. Going to war is not an option, so we need to work together," she said, "and that's also why it's important to bring in the international community and the legal framework that exists to build a kind of consistent stable ground for disarming nuclear weapons." The potential for a bad deal that leaves America's allies in the region at risk was an issue uniting the left and the right heading into the summit. Schumer led a group of 7 Senate Democrats in sending a letter to Trump last week stipulating what it would take for him to receive support for a deal in the split-party Senate. They want a permanent ban on nuclear weapons, as well as language barring North Korea from further developing ballistic missiles. If President Trump meets with Kim Jong-un and receives a deal that truly lives up to these principles, he will have made the world a much safer place, Schumer said during a call with reporters. But if he tries to reach a deal with Kim Jong-un, just for the sake of reaching a deal, and the agreement fails to live up to the principles we've laid out, then he'll have been bested at the negotiating table yet again.